There's a moment in every empath's journey that Jung himself warned us about. A psychological transformation so profound that it creates something far more formidable than any narcissist could ever be. If you've ever felt like you're done being everyone's emotional dumping ground, this video will reveal why your anger might be the most powerful force you'll ever harness. Carl Jung believed that the greatest transformations come from our darkest moments. Today, we're diving deep into what happens when empaths, those naturally gifted at absorbing others' emotions, finally reach their breaking point. But here's what most people don't understand. When an empath stops caring about being nice, they don't just become assertive. They become something far more psychologically sophisticated and, frankly, more dangerous than any narcissist. Stay until the end, because I'm going to reveal the three-stage transformation that turns a fed-up empath into what Jung called the most formidable opponent, and why this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Jung once wrote about the wounded healer archetype, and no one embodies this more than the natural empath. These individuals possess what Jung termed psychic permeability, an almost supernatural ability to sense and absorb the emotional states of others. But here's the psychological trap. Society conditions empaths to believe their gift is also their obligation. They become emotional janitors, constantly cleaning up other people's psychological messes. They're the friend who always listens at 2 a.m. to the same complaints about the same toxic relationship. They're the partner who always forgives infidelity because they can understand their partner's pain. They're the colleague who always covers for others' mistakes because they feel everyone else's stress as their own. Jung observed that empaths often develop what he called inflated responsibility. They feel accountable for everyone else's emotional well-being. This creates a dangerous psychological dynamic where the empath's own needs become invisible, even to themselves. They become so attuned to others' emotional frequencies that they lose connection with their own inner voice. Consider the empath who spends hours comforting a friend through a breakup, only to realize later that they completely ignored their own relationship problems. Or the empathic parent who becomes so focused on managing everyone else's emotions that they never process their own childhood trauma. Jung recognized this pattern as a form of psychological self-abandonment disguised as virtue. The empath's nervous system becomes chronically dysregulated from absorbing so much external emotional data. They develop what modern psychology calls emotional contagion syndrome, automatically taking on others' feelings without conscious choice. Their boundaries become so porous that they can't distinguish between their emotions and those belonging to others. But Jung understood something crucial. This isn't actually sustainable empathy. It's unconscious emotional codependency masquerading as compassion. True empathy, Jung argued, requires the ability to understand others' emotions without being consumed by them. It requires what he called conscious emotional sovereignty. Every empath has a breaking point, and when they reach it, something profound happens in their psyche, something Jung predicted would create a personality type more formidable than any narcissist. Jung understood that psychological transformation often requires what he called enantiodromia, the emergence of the opposite. For empaths, this moment comes when they realize a devastating truth. Their kindness has been weaponized against them. The breaking point usually follows a pattern Jung outlined in his analysis of psychological development. First, there's the accumulation of what he called psychic toxins, years of absorbing negativity, manipulation, and emotional exploitation. The empath's unconscious mind becomes oversaturated with foreign emotions, like a sponge that can hold no more water. Jung documented this phenomenon in his clinical work, noting that empathic individuals often develop what he termed emotional obesity. They become so full of others' unprocessed feelings that they lose access to their own authentic emotional responses. They might cry at others' pain, but feel numb to their own. They might rage on behalf of injustices done to friends while accepting mistreatment in their own lives. Then comes the trigger event. Maybe it's discovering that the friend they've supported through years of drama has been gossiping about their personal struggles at dinner parties. Perhaps it's the moment they realize their emotionally unavailable partner has been using their empathy as a free therapy service while refusing to work on themselves. Or it could be watching someone they've helped repeatedly climb over them for a promotion without a second thought. Jung wrote that this moment activates what he called the shadow integration process. The empath suddenly sees clearly, perhaps for the first time, how their greatest strength has been their greatest vulnerability. They realize they've been operating from what Jung called unconscious martyrdom, sacrificing themselves not from genuine love, but from deep-seated fear of rejection or abandonment. The psychological revelation is often accompanied by what Jung described as righteous fury. Not just anger at others, but a profound rage at the self for allowing such exploitation to continue. This fury, Jung noted, is actually a healthy psychological response. It's the psyche's immune system finally kicking in to protect the individual from further emotional contamination. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Unlike a narcissist who lacks empathy, the fed-up empath still possesses their emotional intelligence. They can still read people like open books, detecting micro-expressions, vocal tones, and energy shifts that reveal others' true intentions. The difference is that now they choose how to respond to what they see. This creates a psychological profile that Jung found more formidable than traditional narcissism because it combines emotional intelligence with strategic detachment, a combination that makes them nearly impossible to manipulate or control. The narcissist operates from emotional blindness, making them predictable. The evolved empath operates from emotional omniscience, making them strategically unbeatable. Jung observed that this transformation often happens rapidly, sometimes over just a few weeks or months. The empath's entire worldview shifts as they begin to see patterns they were previously blind to. They start recognizing the subtle ways people have been taking advantage of their nature, the sophisticated manipulation tactics that flew under their radar, and the emotional games they've been unconsciously enabling. Jung identified 3 distinct stages in this psychological metamorphosis, and understanding them will help you recognize where you or someone you know might be in this process. Stage 1, the awakening. This is what Jung called the moment of conscious recognition. The empath suddenly sees the patterns they've been blind to, like someone putting on glasses for the first time and realizing how blurry their vision had been. They realize they've been operating from what Jung termed unconscious goodness, being kind not from genuine choice, but from psychological programming rooted in childhood conditioning. During this stage, the empath experiences what Jung described as moral shock, the disturbing realization that their goodness has often enabled bad behavior in others. They see how their forgiveness has allowed toxic people to avoid consequences, how their emotional availability has attracted energy vampires, and how their tendency to see the best in everyone has blinded them to red flags that were clearly visible. Jung noted that empaths in this stage often experience what he called retrospective clarity. They suddenly understand past relationships and interactions in completely new ways. The friend who always had emergencies during the empath's important moments wasn't unlucky, they were unconsciously sabotaging. The romantic partner who love-bombed them wasn't passionate, they were predatory. The family member who guilt-tripped them into constant caretaking wasn't needy, they were manipulative. This awakening is often accompanied by intense anger, not just at others, but at themselves for allowing the pattern to continue. Jung noted that this self-directed anger is actually healthy. It's the psyche's way of breaking old, destructive patterns. The empath might think thoughts like, "How could I have been so blind?" or "How did I let them treat me that way for so long?" But Jung emphasized that this anger serves a crucial psychological function. It burns away the old identity of the nice person who prioritizes others' comfort over their own well-being. It's like a psychological forest fire that clears away dead growth to make room for new, healthier patterns. During this stage, empaths often experience what Jung called moral vertigo, a disorienting sense that their entire ethical framework needs rebuilding. They question whether their compassion has been genuine or compulsive, whether their helpfulness has been loving or enabling, and whether their niceness has been authentic or performative. Stage 2, the withdrawal. Jung called this the great pulling back. The empath begins to withdraw their emotional energy from people who have been taking advantage of them. But this isn't just about setting boundaries. It's about a fundamental shift in how they view their role in relationships. During this stage, the empath learns what Jung called conscious cruelty, the ability to say no without explaining themselves, to withdraw support without feeling guilty, to watch people face consequences without rushing to rescue them. This feels revolutionary to someone who has spent years automatically putting everyone else's needs first. Jung observed that empaths in this stage often go through what he termed the pendulum swing. They move from being overly giving to being almost ruthlessly withholding. This is a necessary psychological correction, like a pendulum that must swing far in one direction before finding its center. The empath learns to sit with others' disappointment without immediately trying to fix it. They discover they can hear someone's sob story without automatically opening their wallet, their schedule, or their emotional energy. They realize that other people's poor planning doesn't constitute their emergency. This stage often confuses people around the empath because they're used to unconditional emotional availability. When that disappears, manipulative people often escalate their behavior, trying to guilt the empath back into their old patterns. Jung noted that this escalation actually serves as valuable information for the empath. It reveals who was genuinely in relationship with them versus who was simply using them as an emotional resource. The empath might hear things like, "You've changed," "You're being selfish," or "I don't recognize you anymore." Jung taught that these complaints often translate to, "You're no longer allowing me to exploit you, and I don't like it." But Jung observed something crucial. Empaths in this stage develop an almost supernatural ability to detect manipulation attempts. Their emotional intelligence, combined with their new psychological boundaries, makes them incredibly difficult to control. They can spot guilt trips, emotional blackmail, and manipulation tactics from miles away because they've finally learned to recognize the patterns. During this stage, empaths often experience what Jung called the clarity of indifference. They become remarkably clear-headed about people's motivations because they're no longer emotionally invested in maintaining illusions about others' character. Stage 3. The strategic empath. This is the final transformation, and it's what makes the evolved empath more formidable than any narcissist. Jung called this conscious emotional mastery. At this stage, the empath retains all their emotional intelligence, but gains something narcissists never have: the ability to choose when and how to deploy their empathy. They become what Jung termed consciously selective in their emotional investments. Unlike narcissists who lack empathy entirely, strategic empaths can turn their emotional awareness on and off at will. They can read people's motivations with surgical precision, but choose whether to respond with compassion or indifference based on whether the person has earned their emotional energy. Jung noted that empaths at this stage develop what he called emotional aikido, the ability to redirect others' emotional manipulation back to them without engaging in direct conflict. When someone tries to guilt trip them, they might respond with calm curiosity. "It sounds like you're really struggling with that. What's your plan to address it?" This deflects the manipulation while putting responsibility back where it belongs. The strategic empath has learned to separate empathy from action. They can understand someone's pain without feeling obligated to fix it. They can recognize someone's struggle without taking responsibility for solving it. This creates what Jung called compassionate detachment. They care about human suffering in general, but they're very selective about which specific suffering they choose to address. This creates a psychological profile that's nearly impossible to manipulate because they can see through every emotional game while maintaining complete control over their responses. They've developed what Jung termed emotional sovereignty. They own their emotional responses completely and don't allow others to hijack their emotional state. Jung observed that strategic empaths often become incredibly attractive to healthy people because they radiate what he called contained power, the sense that they're emotionally available but not emotionally desperate, caring but not codependent, strong but not harsh. Now here's why Jung considered this evolved empath more formidable than any narcissist, and why understanding this is crucial for your psychological development. Narcissists are actually quite predictable once you understand their psychology. They lack genuine empathy, so they can't truly understand how others think and feel. They're like emotional colorblind people trying to navigate a world full of emotional subtlety. They rely on crude manipulation tactics that are often transparent to emotionally intelligent people: love bombing, gaslighting, triangulation, and rage when they don't get their way. Their need for narcissistic supply makes them dependent on others' validation, creating exploitable weaknesses. A narcissist's ego is actually quite fragile, which is why they react so explosively when challenged. They're like emotional vampires who need constant feeding from external sources to maintain their inflated self-image. But the strategic empath? They're a different psychological entity entirely. First, they possess what Jung called emotional omniscience. They can read people's true motivations, fears, and desires with startling accuracy. Unlike narcissists who project their own psychology onto others, evolved empaths see people as they actually are. They can detect when someone is lying, when someone is manipulating, when someone is genuinely struggling versus when someone is being dramatic for attention. Jung noted that strategic empaths often develop what he termed psychological X-ray vision. They can see through personas, masks, and social performances to understand people's core drives and fears. This makes them incredibly effective at predicting behavior and outcomes. Second, they have no need for external validation. Having broken free from people-pleasing patterns, they've developed what Jung termed internal psychological sovereignty. They can't be controlled through guilt, shame, or emotional manipulation because they've already faced their shadow and integrated it. The strategic empath has done the deep psychological work that narcissists avoid. They've examined their own motivations, processed their own trauma, and developed genuine self-awareness. This makes them psychologically stable in a way that narcissists never achieve. Third, and most importantly, they understand human psychology at a level that allows them to influence outcomes without appearing to do so. Jung noted that evolved empaths often become master strategists precisely because they understand everyone's psychological drivers while revealing none of their own. When an evolved empath decides someone has crossed a line, they don't explode in narcissistic rage. Instead, they methodically withdraw support, expose manipulative behavior through strategic questions, and allow natural consequences to unfold. They orchestrate situations where toxic people face the results of their actions without the empath's usual interference. For example, instead of confronting a manipulative coworker directly, the strategic empath might simply stop covering for their mistakes, stop providing emotional support, and stop sharing useful information. They don't sabotage the person. They simply withdraw their assistance and let the person's natural incompetence become visible to others. Jung observed that this approach is far more effective than narcissistic aggression because it appears completely reasonable to outside observers. The empath isn't attacking anyone, they're simply no longer enabling destructive behavior. When questioned, they can honestly say things like, "I've just been focusing on my own responsibilities lately," or "I thought they could handle it themselves." The strategic empath also possesses what Jung called emotional Aikido mastery. They can redirect others' negative energy back to them without seeming to do anything at all. When someone tries to dump their problems on the empath might respond with genuine-sounding concern. "That sounds really challenging. What have you tried so far to solve it?" This puts the responsibility back on the person while appearing supportive. Jung noted that narcissists often become frustrated when trying to manipulate strategic empaths because nothing they try works. The empath doesn't take the bait, doesn't get defensive, doesn't try to prove themselves, and doesn't provide the emotional reaction the narcissist is seeking. This psychological invulnerability often drives narcissists to reveal their true nature more clearly to others. But Jung always reminded us that every psychological strength carries the potential for shadow expression. The evolved empath's power comes with significant risks that we need to address honestly. The primary danger Jung identified is what he called emotional tyranny. The temptation to use emotional intelligence as a weapon rather than a tool for healthy boundaries. When empaths discover they can manipulate others' emotions just as effectively as any narcissist, some become what Jung termed shadow empaths. These individuals retain their emotional intelligence but lose their compassion. They understand others' psychology perfectly, but use that understanding to control and punish rather than to create healthy relationships. Jung warned that shadow empaths can become more destructive than narcissists because they're far more subtle and sophisticated in their manipulation. A shadow empath might use their knowledge of someone's insecurities to subtly undermine their confidence. They might weaponize their understanding of people's triggers to cause maximum emotional damage during conflicts. They might use their reputation as a good person to mask their manipulative behavior, making it harder for victims to be believed when they speak up. Jung observed that shadow empaths often develop what he called righteous cruelty. They convince themselves that their manipulative behavior is justified because they're punishing bad people. They become emotional vigilantes, using their psychological skills to hurt those they deem unworthy of compassion. Another risk Jung identified is emotional isolation. Some evolved empaths become so disgusted with human behavior that they withdraw completely from emotional connection. While this protects them from exploitation, it also cuts them off from the genuine love and connection that makes life meaningful. These empaths might develop what Jung called misanthropic superiority. They see themselves as emotionally evolved while viewing most other people as psychologically primitive. They become like emotional hermits, safe in their isolation but increasingly disconnected from the human experience. Jung also noted the danger of righteousness addiction, where the evolved empath becomes so focused on calling out toxic behavior that they lose sight of their own continued growth. They become professional boundary setters, but forget that evolution requires ongoing self-examination. These empaths might develop what Jung termed boundary fundamentalism. They become so rigid in their standards that they miss opportunities for genuine connection with imperfect but well-meaning people. They might reject others for minor infractions while failing to recognize their own shadow behaviors. Another shadow risk Jung identified is emotional superiority complex, where the evolved empath begins to see their emotional intelligence as evidence of their overall superiority to others. They might develop contempt for people they perceive as less emotionally aware, forgetting that everyone is on their own psychological journey at their own pace. Jung emphasized that the key to avoiding these shadow expressions is maintaining what he called conscious humility, remembering that psychological evolution is an ongoing process, not a destination. The evolved empath must continue examining their own motivations and behaviors, remaining open to feedback and growth. The healthy evolved empath uses their power to create better relationships and protect themselves from exploitation, not to control or punish others. They maintain what Jung called compassionate boundaries. They protect themselves while remaining open to genuine connection with worthy people. So how do we navigate this transformation in a healthy way? Jung provided a roadmap for what he called conscious empath evolution, a way to claim your power without losing your humanity. The first principle Jung emphasized is earned empathy. Instead of offering compassion indiscriminately, the evolved empath learns to observe people's actions over time. Empathy becomes something that must be earned through consistent, reciprocal behavior. This doesn't mean becoming cold or calculating. It means recognizing that your emotional energy is precious and should be invested in people who value and reciprocate it. Jung called this psychological investment wisdom, treating your emotional resources with the same care you'd treat your financial resources. The evolved empath learns to distinguish between people who are going through temporary difficulties and people who create chronic drama. They offer support to those facing genuine challenges while withdrawing from those who seem addicted to crisis and conflict. Jung noted that this discernment requires what he called pattern recognition over time. Instead of responding to each request for help in isolation, the evolved empath looks at the broader pattern of the person's behavior. Do they consistently take responsibility for their actions? Do they show genuine gratitude for help received? Do they reciprocate support when the empath needs it? The second principle is transparent boundaries. Rather than passive-aggressively withdrawing, the healthy evolved empath communicates their boundaries clearly. They explain what behaviors they will and won't tolerate, and they follow through consistently. Jung noted that this transparency actually helps relationships succeed because it eliminates the guesswork and manipulation that often destroys connections between empaths and others. When expectations are clear, healthy people can meet them, while unhealthy people reveal themselves through their resistance to reasonable boundaries. The evolved empath might say things like, "I'm happy to listen to you vent for 15 minutes, but then I need us to talk about solutions or change the subject." Or, "I can help you move this weekend, but I'll need you to have everything packed and ready when I arrive." These boundaries aren't punitive, they're protective. They allow the empath to maintain their generosity while preventing exploitation.